was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever done in my life to that point. Like, that's when I felt the most free, the most excited. And then I was essentially like, wait, this is a fun thing, but you do this as a job? And they're like, yeah, this is our job. And I was like, this is the coolest job in the whole world. Like, I want to do this job. So I immediately tried to become a bike messenger and eventually became a bike messenger just because I was like, this is the greatest job in the world. You're going to pay me to ride my bike fast and recklessly.
Joining us in the studio today is an American cyclist, artist, and adventurer known for his participation in various cycling disciplines, such as cyclocross, fixed gear criteriums, and gravel races. He's been involved in the urban cycling scene for many years and gained popularity for his aggressive riding style and his exceptional bike handling skills. He's also the host of Zip's YouTube channel. Please welcome Chas Christiansen. Hey, Chas.
How's it going? Good to be here.
Are you blushing? Did I make you sound too cool?
A little bit. I never thought I had exceptional bike handling skills. I just get lucky a lot.
Oh, you do. I have seen you pop wheelies in places that I never thought they could be done.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, hey, Chas, where are you calling in from today in the world?
I'm calling in from my basement in Oakland, California. It's my little art studio / bike cave. It's kind of my happy place, so to say.
Well, we can see a lot of cool things in there. We might have to, later in the show, we might have to dissect your background. Chas, you know the format of the show. You know, we talk about a variety of things, but we often like to start with the foundation. So I'm just going to jump in with the basics, right?
Yep.
Where were you born?
I was born in Eugene, Oregon, Sacred Heart Hospital.
And did you grow up in Oregon or did you quickly move somewhere else?
I am a Pacific Northwest kid. So I did spend the formative years, the early years in Eugene, Oregon till about second grade. And then my family moved up to Olympia, Washington, where I spent up through high school. And then I moved to Portland, Oregon to pursue a little bit of college. So Pacific Northwest, born and raised.
What did your parents do growing up?
My mother was in education. She was a teacher. So she taught a little bit when I was much younger, and then she moved into kind of the state level education management with the State Department of Education in both Oregon and Washington. And my dad did a lot of different stuff. He was a psychologist. He also worked in some manufacturing jobs, kind of a jack of all trades.
You have any brothers and sisters?
I have two half siblings. I have a half brother who I grew up with, spent a bunch of time together. He's actually in the Air Force, so he travels the world kind of like I do, just for an entirely different reason. And then I have a half sister who I didn't really grow up with, but later on in life, we've managed to develop a really solid relationship. So it's interesting to have a sibling that you grew up with and then later on in life don't see a lot because they're stationed all over the world, and then have a sibling that you never saw growing up, maybe once a year, and then actually have a really good relationship with and you see much more regularly.
Any chance you're an aunt or an uncle?
I am both an aunt. Actually, I'm an uncle. I was about to say I'm an aunt and an uncle, but no, I'm just an uncle. Relatively recent development. Both of my nieces and nephews are very young, so it's a big step for me.
That's cool. So fun. It's cool to be an aunt or an uncle. And I apologize for asking you if you were an aunt or an uncle. I should have just said uncle, but
it's totally okay. I mean, you never know. You never want to assume anything. So
tell me about the types of activities you were into as a kid, sort of physical activities and sports.
Oh man, I just loved being outside. I played some organized sports, soccer, cross country, and anything kind of involved a lot of running and movement. But for me, I think my favorite thing to do as a kid was just to go outside, and I have crazy imagination, and I would just make things up and play outside. I grew up kind of in the outskirts of Olympia, suburban development, so there was all these empty houses under construction, big mounds of dirt. And I guess I would go out for like 8 hours a day, with like my Nerf guns and like my spaceman helmet. And I would just be out there in the dirt piles playing. And I remember just creating these, fantastic stories in my head and all these adventures. And sometimes friends would come. Most of the time I'd be by myself, just out playing in the dirt. Yeah. So just being outside. I mean, I spent a lot of time drawing as a kid and creating art, but I spent most of my time outside and just kind of doing stuff. Eventually it turned into skateboarding. And that was kind of a good mode, a good reason to go different places, which I think segued into cycling a lot. Is there was this activity that I liked that I would go places, skate parks, go on skate trips, travel around. But just kind of being outside, being active was always my favorite thing as a kid.
I'm picturing the movie E.T. and the forests and hills and suburb divisions. Is that what your backyard looked like?
Yeah, it's pretty close to that. There was this other movie, I want to say it's called Explorers. It's like kind of around the same time. It's three kids. They build a spaceship in their basement and they like fly it out and meet aliens. that was also like very much the same thing. I'm really into sci-fi, if you can't tell. I'm like into that kind of stuff. But the subdivision I grew up on was at the time the edge of town. So it was like my little subdivision and then nothing but farmland and forest. And there's like a local BMX track that the kids have built illegally on someone's property. And, I knew
Yeah.
every single foot of every single trail, within my backyard. Now it's kind of in the middle of town because the town has now grown all the way around it. My mom still lives in the same house that I grew up in Olympia. So now it's in the middle of town, but when I lived there, it was the edge of town.
And now, Chess, you live in Oakland now. What brought you to Oakland, and how long have you been there?
Well, I've been in California for almost 15 years now. From growing up in Olympia, I moved to Portland, Oregon, did a little bit of college, did a lot of other stuff, kind of found bike messaging, found bike racing, so to say. And at the time, Portland, Oregon was like maybe the AAA league of bike messaging, to use a baseball analogy. Wasn't really the big leagues. You could make some money, you could have some fun. There were some bike races, but I wanted to go to the big leagues of bike racing, which was San Francisco or New York City. So I was like, I'm going to move to San Francisco for a year, and then I'm going to move to New York City, and I'm going to be a bike messenger in New York City. Needless to say, that didn't happen. I moved to San Francisco, and I've been in the Bay Area ever since. I've been a bike messenger in New York City a ton. I love it, but I'm a West Coast kid. So I moved to San Francisco, kind of just hung out there for almost 11 years, and then moved to Oakland about 4.5, 5 years ago. Mainly just to kind of get out of the hustle and bustle of the city. Kind of got priced out of San Francisco a little bit, but Portland is a little more or Oakland is a little more like Portland, which I really enjoyed, a little more neighborhoody. So that was a big thing. And honestly, this is going to be a very divisive answer. I think the riding is better in the East Bay than in Marin. I said it.
Okay. And when you say that, are you referring to off-road or on-road?
Both, baby. I mean, Marin is great. Don't
Really?
get me wrong. Some of the best riding out there, but there's only so many trails you can hit in Marin. It's the headlands. It's like this tiny little spit of land that's amazing. The Oakland Hills, so many roads, so many trails, excellent mountain biking, excellent everything. And it just goes on until you hit the Central Valley. And you don't want to ride in the Central Valley. So it's definitely kind of hemmed in by geography. But I just think there's way more diversity in the Oakland Hills. You got Mount Hamilton, Mount Diablo. I love them both, but I really enjoy riding out of Oakland.
Let's stick with your childhood still for a bit longer. When you were a kid, do you have any memories of looking up to athletes as heroes? Did you follow anyone, either pro skaters or pro cyclists or pro basketball? Like, did you have any sports heroes back in the day?
You know, you're not one for heroes or idols. I don't know. I definitely followed people, and in skateboarding especially, I think a lot of my like personal style came from looking at how certain skateboarders dressed and like how they
Yeah.
carried themselves, and that was a big part of like influencing me in terms of like my style. But I don't, I don't really look up to people like I want to be that person or I want to do that thing that person's doing. I guess looking to me, it was a lot of I love reading, and so there's a lot of characters in books. And it sounds a little cliche, but a lot of like Jack London, Edward Abbey, things like that. Like the characters in those books was something that I would like, man, that's kind of a life that I would want to lead. Not necessarily idolizing, but just in terms of I've always wanted to travel, have adventures, try to change things in the world. And so I always kind of found myself more closely aligned with characters in books than with athletes or things like
Mm.
that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. All right, let's get out of your childhood for a little bit and let's go into sort of education and schooling. Were you a good student?
Uh, Kind of. I was a kind of student. My mom was in education, so obviously education was a huge part of my life growing up, and it was something that I was very much not something that was let slip by the wayside in my house. I always had my
Yeah.
homework done and everything, but um, through middle school, like elementary school, middle school, yeah, and high school, definitely had found skateboarding, had kind of found the counterculture, kind of very starting to push the boundaries of anti-establishment. But at the same
Yeah.
time, was in AP classes, took like all the AP history, AP math, AP, biology. Definitely was always wanted to challenge myself and learn more. My attendance was not great. I got decent grades and I really enjoyed focusing on certain projects, but I also enjoyed skipping school and going to go skate and like have adventures and definitely even just skipping school for the fact of skipping school. I definitely got a big kick on kind of being an anti-establishment, like I'm skipping school to do nothing today because I'm skipping school. But yeah, I mean, I guess education was good. And then I went to college in Portland, and I kind of excelled at college. I really enjoyed it. Studied political science and sociology, but then quickly realized that there was not a good financial future in either of those two careers. Um, and stopped going to school when I ran out of my own money. I never wanted to take out loans. I never wanted to be in debt to go to school. So there was a point about 2.5 years into my college career that I kind of just ran out of the money that I had saved and the money that some family had. I worked full time when I was in school to kind of put myself through school, and just got to this point where I was like, I'm not going to take out a loan. So I stopped going to college, which I kind of
Yeah.
regret, but kind of don't.
Two follow-ups there. First, what did you do? What did you do for work throughout school?
Whew. Everything. I've been working since I was like 12 years old. I mean, paper route when I was a kid, hustling, mowing lawns, raking leaves. Worked at Blockbuster Video. Still have the Blockbuster Video name tag. Kind of a shout out to that
Nice.
generation. Worked at Zoomies in the mall. Worked at a skate shop in the mall. Worked at Circuit City. And then I had a bunch of really weird jobs. I drove a tractor on a Weyerhaeuser tree farm when I was
Mm,
in college. I worked at a butcher shop. I worked as a prep cook, line cook, dishwasher, all over the service industry. Kind of sold insurance on the side. Wasn't very good at that because I didn't even understand what insurance was. But I mean, honestly, I was one of those people that any opportunity that came my way, I would just say yes, and then I would figure it out as it came. And I've always kind of been into hustling. I ran a t-shirt printing company and worked at a screen printing studio, like an industrial one, and then kind of ran a clothing line on the side where I would work all day at the screen printing studio, and then they let me use the presses after hours to like make my own designs, and then I would sell the shirts. I would load up my messenger
that's
bag full of
awesome.
shirts, travel to a different city, and then go sell the shirts out of my messenger bag, and then get on the train to go home. And that was like how I made money.
And Chaz, were you always into art? Where did the art bugs first sort of stick?
I think it's always been there. My mom was supportive of my parents were both supportive of me doing art, although they always saw it as just like a hobby. But I've always just loved
Yeah.
doodling and drawing on things. And there's a lot that happens in the world, and especially with my life, especially as being a bike messenger and kind of being outside and being kind of a little more connected to the world than a lot of people. That was how I interpreted and kind of put into permanence the things I saw and heard when I was outside. Like things people would say, images that I saw, something that piqued my interest or that stuck with me. A lot of times you see that and then you forget it. But for me, I would just doodle it. I would draw it on my messenger manifest or on I had a bunch of drawing notebooks, and it's just something that I was always there. And it was actually a really pivotal point in my life. At a certain point, art kind of got me in trouble, and then that put me on the path I'm on today, which is a little weird to think about.
Let's talk about that. So I'm just in my mind, I'm going to graffiti and
Wow.
jail
Wow, you
or
see it? You hit the nail right on the head. Right after I graduated from high school, I was really into graffiti in high school. Right after I graduated from high school, I grew up in Olympia, Washington. Olympia beer, for those of you that remember, used to be brewed in Olympia, Washington. So the Olympia
yeah.
Brewery was a big feature of the town. It got shut down, bought by Anheuser-Busch, shut down when I was in high school. So it was an abandoned brewery. And right outside of high school, I got arrested for writing graffiti on the Olympia Brewery. There's actually a really
Oh
amazing
man.
photo of me with my paint covered hands up against this piece I just painted, and you can see the Olympia Brewery sign in the background because when the cops caught me, they made me take incriminating photos. But I had been all set to go to college and do the post high school thing, and that obviously totally derailed it. Instead of going off to college, I spent a year doing community service and working off these charges and everything like that, and just kind of had my life pause for a year and have to live at home. I was living not at home, and I had to move back in with my mom because the court said I had to live at a stable location, not like the punk house that I was living in. And so it really shifted the whole trajectory of my life. And as soon as I got done with it and cleared myself of all the charges and did all the community service, paid off all the fines, I loaded everything into this super kind of crappy car that I had, this convertible, and I just drove around the country for 6 months. I had no other plan than just to skateboard, camp, just get out of where I was. And that ended me in Portland. And then I quickly found out about being a bike messenger, racing cyclocross, and it kind of sent me on my way. I think that if I hadn't got arrested for writing graffiti, I would have had a totally different life trajectory. Would have gone to college directly out of high school. I basically took a year off out
Right.
of high school to kind of deal with this graffiti beef that I had gotten. And I think that art in some way really set me on the path I'm on today.
Interesting. I'm curious about community service. Did community service instill upon you any positive values, or what was that experience like?
You know, it made me realize that everybody is a human being and everybody deserves respect, even if they don't look like it. I will fully admit that I was a typical teenager. I judged people on how they looked, how they dressed. My community service that I chose was washing dishes at the local Salvation Army, and I had to do 900 hours of dishwashing. So I went to the Salvation Army. I had a full-time job. I would work all day, had to be in community college, go to community college, and then I would go wash dishes at the Salvation Army for a couple hours every night. And you just realize that if someone's houseless, homeless, if they're dealing with mental illnesses, whatever, they're people. Because I would talk to them. And at first, I was, wouldn't talk to anyone, just do my thing, wash my dishes, leave. But eventually, you get done and you eat the same meal that they ate with them after you're done washing their dishes, and you're picking up after people that I think society and me, especially at the time, was like, these are homeless people. Why am I picking up after homeless people and doing their dishes?
Right.
And after doing that, it really made me realize like these are just people. It doesn't matter if they have a house or they don't have a house or they have mental illnesses or not. They're just people. And it was a very humbling experience for me, actually. And I got really good at
That's
washing
incredible.
dishes. Like, I'm best dishwasher in the world.
What about today? Did you carry that skill to today? And are you great at washing dishes today?
I have a teenage son at the house. He's a great dishwasher. I've imparted my skills onto him. He does the dishwashes. But I mean, yeah, it's something that I've honestly always carried with me in some way. I think a lot of it is just don't judge a book by its cover. Don't make a snap judgment on people based on how they look and how they carry themselves. It's huge working as a bike messenger. I worked as a bike messenger all over the world. You're directly confronted with like the best things about a big city and an urban environment, and also the worst things. Um, and so it made me look at people differently than I would immediately be like, oh, you're just some person who's on drugs right now. And instead, it's like, I have no idea the demons you're battling. What's wrong with you? If I give you if I acknowledge you instead of walking by you, give you, a nod, say hello, even if I can't give you any money, that kind of stuff goes a long way. So it definitely
Yeah.
changed the way that I view the world around me.
It's funny what life will serve you and how that might change you, right?
Right.
Chaz, let's talk about your first sort of big adventure post your walkabout. You end up in Portland first to become a bike messenger. What drew you to being a bike messenger?
Man, fixed gear bikes. I'm going to be totally honest. This is a story I've told a bunch of times, but I was started to race cross in Portland, got a cross bike, going to race the Cross Crusades, and I just saw these guys, these people, men and women, in shorts, cut off t-shirts, slamming beers, racing cyclocross on fixed gear bikes. I had no idea what a fixed gear bike was, but they're like
Yeah.
obviously having so much more fun than everybody else. They're skidding, they're like jumping, they're crashing. Someone was like, somebody explained what it was, and then I started to notice them around town. And downtown Portland's kind of on a hill, and I rode to work, I rode to kind of everywhere I needed to go, and I would just see these people skidding down these hills and just flying through traffic, like way faster than I could go through traffic. And I was like, that's that's it. That's what I want. And I eventually found my way to the Ash Street Saloon, RIP, tiny little dive bar downtown Portland, where alley cat races happen. So before I became a bike messenger, I found out about alley cat races, which were unsanctioned street races that simulated a bike messenger workday. You get a manifest, much like you would as a bike messenger, with a bunch of addresses, and the first person to go to all the addresses and get back wins. And there's no rules. You go on the freeway and you do whatever you want. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever done in my life to that point.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
that's when I felt the most free, the most excited. And then I was essentially like, wait, this is a fun thing, but you do this as a job? And they're like, yeah, this is our job. And I was like, this is the coolest job in the whole world. Like, I want to do this job. So I immediately tried to become a bike messenger and eventually became a bike messenger just because I was like, this is the greatest job in the world. You're going to pay me to ride my bike fast and recklessly.
yeah. Now, bike messengers have a pretty bad reputation in society. They ride through the streets fast, they cut in and out of cars, they avoid, traffic signals, they don't use signals themselves, they just, are blazing through the cities. Is it still that way, or have things toned down a little bit?
It's still that way and it's not. I think that's something that as a young bike messenger, male or female, there's just so much enthusiasm. If you find that job 99% of the time, you're literally there because you're like, I get to go fast. There are no rules. I'm just going to go as fast as possible. I was a bike messenger for about 11 years. And the first, 4 or 5 years, full gas, full throttle, no cares. And by the time I got done, I was, stopping at red lights, put my foot down, taking it easy. I think it's just, youthful exuberance and enthusiasm. And eventually, you work once you roll off enough hoods of cars and, hit the deck enough times, you're like, man, this isn't worth it. I mean, obviously, as a bike messenger, you probably have little to no health insurance and you're kind of living on a thread. So you start to realize that if you want to actually do this job in the long term, you got to kind of calm down a little bit and not crash as much. But, it depends on the person. I will fully admit that every once in a while, I'll still get on the track bike and I'll go to the grocery store and I'll find myself running every red light between my house and the grocery store at full speed. And that's not every time,
Right.
but sometimes it's just like a bug. Once it bites you, it's kind of there forever.
Did you turn into a bit of a gear junkie through those 11 years? Like, were bike parts and tuning your bike a big deal, or did you just ride a stock bike?
You know, yes and no, because it's a track bike, right? So there's nothing to it. It's just handlebars,
Yeah.
saddle, pedals. So I wasn't. They definitely idolized a couple different bikes, like the '93 Cannondale track, the blue Cannondale track frame, one of the first aluminum track frames. You start to hunt down these specific frames, the most uncomfortable frames known to man, the KHS Aero from the
Yeah.
same era, just like straight down tube, super tight geometry. We loved that stuff. Um, and I was actually lucky enough to work with this team Mash. This I made a like local bike shop made this big fixed gear video about 15 to 12 years ago now. They worked with Chinelli, and I was able to design about six different bikes for Mash and Chinelli. Would go out to Milan, meet with the designers, really kind of break
Sweet.
out. We built one of the first fixed gear criterium specific frames. So I kind of wasn't a gear junkie, but I was always really interested in how bikes were built and like creating like the perfect bike. And I can truly say that at one point in like 2013, I was able to design with Chinelli and Mash the perfect bike. And I got to, tell the Italian engineers, this is what I want. This would be the greatest thing. Me and a couple other racers, the race on the team, and they made us these Italian built prototypes. And I remember getting this bike
Hmm.
from Italy and getting on it and being like, I have created the perfect bike. Like, ah. So maybe not a gear junkie, but still very much interested in like the minutia of riding a bike, just in a different way.
Yeah. Did that bike have a straight bar or a drop bar?
Those were drop bars. That was the Chinelli Parallax, and it was essentially track geometry for one of the first tapered head tube track bikes. So obviously the stability and everything was huge. Did a lot with the geometry, but it was almost all criterium racing was almost all drop bars. Essentially taking the velodrome bike and trying to get a little bit of the road geometry so it's more stable at speed because you're taking left and right turns, but definitely curly bars. The flat bars were strictly for the bike messaging. That's for the streets.
Chaz, I've traveled to and from New York a few times over the past few years, and I've noticed a trend that bike messengers in New York, a bunch of them have e-bikes now.
It's true.
What's going on?
So I think there's a very big distinction between what bike messengers would consider bike messengers and people that do deliveries on bikes. And I think in New
Deliveries,
York,
yeah.
that distinction is massive. So bike messengers, I don't think very many actual bike messengers that do the tried and true, like picking up packages, fashion documents, ride e-bikes. But if you're doing food delivery in New York, an e-bike 100% makes sense. So I think a lot of the people
Yeah.
you saw were people riding e-bikes doing food delivery. But I think tried and true bike messengers would take offense to the fact that somebody was riding an e-bike. Although e-bikes, e-cargo bikes are massive in the bike messenger community, especially in Europe, because people are really
Right.
starting to transition from cars to using cargo bikes. And having an electric motor on your cargo bike when you're schlepping, hundreds of pounds around town makes a ton of sense.
Chaz, you mentioned that you've gotten to be a bike messenger all over the world. So how does that work? You're affiliated with probably one group in Portland, but what did you say, "Hey, I want to go live in France for a year," and do you have a sister agency there? How'd you get all over the world doing bike messenger?
There's a massive community of bike messengers around the world. And I think that's one of the big things that drew me to the community more than just the job. The first time I ever went to Berlin, one of the first times I ever went to Europe, I had no idea what was going on. Never been out there. Just saw a picture. I got on the off the airport, built the bike, got on the train, saw a picture on the train of Alexanderplatz, in Mita, the big tower with the ball, and was like, I know that
Yeah.
picture. I'm gonna go there. Went there, got off the train, and just sat there and waited till I saw a bike messenger ride by. Just random dude. I could tell he was a bike messenger. You can see your own. Chased him down and was like, "Hey, I'm Chaz. I'm from San Francisco. I'm a bike messenger. I just got into town." And he was immediately like, "Oh, do you have a place to stay? Here's the keys to my house. This is where we're all going to drink beer tonight." I
No
stayed at the dude's house
way.
for a week. And that is the bike messenger community. If you are a bike messenger and you go to a city where there are bike messengers, you instantly have a community. And so finding work was not hard. I mean, the bike messengers, for as much as we love to work, there's always someone who's hungover or tired or just got crashed. There's always people that, there's always work to be done. Any city you go to, you're just like, I have friends and I have a job. And then me specifically, I started a courier company in San Francisco called TCB Courier, which ran for 9 years. And it we had a really solid framework that a lot of other courier companies use to develop their courier companies. And so at a certain point, we had companies around the world that were essentially running our framework, our business model, and also our logistics software. I still run some bike messenger logistics software as kind of a side
Oh,
business.
nice.
And so I would be able to go to these cities and literally using my own software that I didn't develop it. I'm the business development side, but that my team developed, I would just log in and be like, cool, I'm working for your company now. What's up?
TCB Courier, taking care of business. Is that what it stands for? Or do you have some other?
Taking care of business, baby. Taking care of business.
All right. Were you Elvis inspired or?
The guy I started it with was a little Elvis inspired. Honestly, I had gone to the Cycle Messenger World Championships in Tokyo, Japan in 2009, I think. Nico de Portaga Cabrera was there. That's
Yeah.
where we met. And I came home and I didn't have a job. When I left, my dispatcher was like, "We totally got you. Go for 2 weeks, race, come back. You got work." Came back. He was like, "I gave your job to somebody else. You're screwed." So I started a company because that's the way bike messaging worked. Very cutthroat, very transient community. So I started this courier company because I didn't have a job, and we just happened to be right at the right place at the right time in San Francisco. We just blew up, and at one point, we're doing thousands of deliveries a day, having like 60 or 70 riders on the road every day, and just kind of became this like massive thing. So it kind of just came out of nowhere. I didn't have a job, so I started my own.
I'm assuming you've had your fair share of crashes or injuries throughout the 11 or so years that you were a messenger.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I think honestly, one of the things that no one talks about is to become a bike messenger, you have to get really good at crashing, and by that I
Yeah.
mean you have to get really good at getting hit or crashing and not injuring yourself enough that you can't go to work the next day. So I'm pretty good at tucking and rolling. Thankfully, knock on some wood, I have not had any serious injuries. I broke a collarbone,
Ooh.
plenty of broken ribs, plenty of bruises and scrapes and everything like that. But I rode conservatively even when I was at my wildest. I was always like, I still want to be able to do this again tomorrow. And even that really transitioned into racing. I think a lot of my race career, one of the reasons that it was so successful is just because I'm not one of those racers that will blindly sprint into a dangerous situation. Like no win is worth breaking bones to me. And I will always dial it back from like, 12 to 9.5 just
Yeah.
so I can do that again the next day. Because I mean, recovering is horrible. No one wants to get hurt, and especially no one wants to recover from getting injured. So, the bike messaging
Yeah.
really taught me how to take a hit or not take the hit and then keep going.
Let's talk about that transition from bike messenger to racer. I'm assuming you probably raced a little bit while you were messengering too, but tell us about your race career and were you getting paid to race or were you racing for fun?
Both. Initially, as a bike messenger, you're not paid a lot, but these things called alley cats were really big. And there was a point for a couple years, kind of right before I started TCB, and so like 2009, 2010, that I was racing alley cats every weekend and then selling the prizes to pay rent.
Mm,
Prizes were really
mm,
good. Sometimes you'd win cash, you'd win bike frames, you'd win bags. So you'd work all week and then race all weekend, to travel around, mainly the West Coast, like Portland, San Francisco, LA. Sometimes you go out to East Coast, you go to New York or Philly or Chicago and race. And it started out really slowly. Eventually a company was like, "Oh, we'll buy your plane ticket to this event." I remember a company in case bought my plane ticket to the Cycle Messenger World Championships in Tokyo that I was talking about, and that was all I had to do was like kind of write on their blog and take some photos, and that was like the first time
nice.
that that happened. And then through Mash, which was kind of I was racing with Mash, we were just kind of a group of friends. I started working with Oakley, who's actually been my longtime sponsor, about a decade with Oakley as a sponsored rider, doing their prescription stuff. But that's as Red Hook Criterium's fixed gear criterium started to get big, really just kind of fell into this idea of being a sponsored athlete, which I think in reality was a little more like an amateur skateboarder because you're not really getting paid a salary, at least at that point. You're getting a lot of product. People are buying you plane tickets, maybe buying you a hotel, but really for the love of the game. But then eventually transitioned to being a full-time professional athlete from racing fixed gear criteriums and gravel, which I always thought was funny. Never really raced sanctioned racing. I I don't even think
Yeah.
I own have a road race license. Definitely Cat 5. Cat 5 for life.
Chaz, let's talk about sponsorship as a professional athlete. First, I guess, were you always an individual, or did you ever join a team of individuals that made something bigger?
Well, I was with MASH, and that team was sponsored by a number of companies, but I've always been an individual sponsored athlete. I think
Yeah.
the term privateer, I think is very apt. I love that people are acting like that's a new thing, that they're doing it, because that's for most of the people that I know that have been sponsored athletes, that's how we've done it forever. I mean, I've been doing this for a
Yeah.
decade as a sponsored athlete, and you had your own program, and you negotiated with your own sponsors and kind of figured everything else out on your own. So I've always I've always been on my own, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk to the community for a second. If you were to give some advice to, a young cycling enthusiast that was interested in your lifestyle or your work style, what might you tell them about how to become a sponsored privateer or ambassador?
I think one of the big things, and I actually get asked this question a lot, and I always tell them the same thing. I'm like, be yourself, have fun, and it's not about winning. I think so many young athletes think that the way to get sponsorships is to win and to be the top step
Yeah.
of the podium. But I think in reality, having a good time and letting people see that you're having a good time and acting like your true self. And if you're a little weird, be a little weird. And just being out there and participating is way more important to partners than winning races. I mean, you can't be a slouch. You've got to train and you've got to be fast, and you should definitely be getting the top 10, and getting W's never hurt anybody, but people don't remember the win all the time. They remember
Yeah.
the person in the race that animated the race, that gave them a pat on the back, that got crashed and got up and finished the race, that something interesting happened, because wins get forgotten. But I think if you can create a good story about what you're doing and influence people in a positive way, that's what is invaluable to partners.
Is it critical to have, a social media presence and content out there? Do you need to have a blog? Do you need to have videos? Like, what's the minimum viable amount of self-promotion required to sort of get noticed?
So MVSP, minimum viable self promotion. Uh,
Yeah.
I that's an interesting question because I started before Instagram. I became a
Yeah.
sponsored athlete, and I've as watched this kind of peak. I feel like, and honestly, I feel like it's kind of starting to decline. It's tough. I actually really feel for athletes that are amazing athletes and have a good story, but just aren't storytellers. Because I do feel like being able to tell a story is maybe not a cornerstone of developing a good sponsorship program, but I think at least in this day and age is a necessity. You have to be able to share with the public what you're doing, and whether you're not, specifically promoting this coffee cup brought to you by this sponsor because it's great. I don't think you have to go that far, but you definitely need to be able to share what you're doing and share the products that you're using, and you need to be able to do it in an authentic way. But I think the biggest thing is being authentic, and not just doing the like brought to you by SRAM, and being able to
Yeah.
kind of just tell the story in a way that's natural. But I unfortunately or fortunately, depending on the type of person you are, do think that sharing things, creating content, whether it be videos, drawing things, taking photos, doing podcasts, doing blogs, I think that is an important part of being a sponsored athlete now. Unless
Yeah.
you're winning all the time. If you're winning all the time, you can do whatever you want.
If you're winning all the time, the media is going to take care of your promotion.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. But that's very, very few and far between who's actually winning all the time. So
So pre-social media, right? Because now your social media presence is crushing it. You've got, tens of thousands of followers. You're approaching 50,000 followers, which is amazing. But before that, did you have a blog?
no, I kind of had two different things. One, I was part of MASH. And so that's, you said, the media, I was winning a lot of stuff. It
Okay.
wasn't like big stuff. It was like a lot of fixed gear criteriums and alley cat races and things like that. But in that small niche, I got a lot of coverage because I was winning a lot of stuff in this very small niche of cycling. So that helped a lot. But I went on a lot of really crazy adventures with other people that produced content around it.
Mm.
I crossed the Darien Gap, from Panama to Colombia with Lucas Brunel, made a video about that, rode across Africa with Lucas Brunel, did a number of other kind of bigger adventures with people that they then created the content around it. And I was just there. I think I again just got really lucky. I was just there to kind of be there and do my thing and like have a good time and be stoked. I said yes to a lot of really dumb things and got myself into some really kind of gnarly situations because of that. But a lot of it was just kind of being willing to put myself out there and go do these kind of crazy things. And I just was lucky enough that someone was there to document it.
All right, let's fast forward. What was the next chapter in your life? So you went from messenger to racer. What was next? Or are you still in that chapter as a sponsored racer, ambassador, you know,
So that's
artist, adventurer?
I think that's a really good question because I feel like I'm in that chapter still. I think it's a long chapter. So maybe it's the first half of the book, and we're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But I no longer really work as a bike messenger. Occasionally I'll go work for a week in New York, essentially moonlighting, just to kind of keep my legs fresh and remember it. Um, but I do a lot of media work for brands now. Like you said, I work with Zip and I host their weekly podcast. And so I still race. My racing has transitioned. I primarily focus on ultra endurance events now. So like this year, I have 3 races on my calendar that I'm focusing on personally as an athlete. Thankfully, my sponsors are okay with that. And they know I no longer need to race, like a full race calendar, but I still
Yeah.
race a ton of races mainly to produce content for brands and produce content for myself. So it's interesting because I feel like I'm still living that lifestyle. Uh, Kind of wondering what's next. I'm almost 40 years old, so very thankful that I managed to do it this long. Um, but it's a really great job. It's probably the coolest job I
Yeah.
would ever have in my life. So in my mind, I'm going to continue to try and do this job as long as I can.
Pretty rad. Chaz, what's been one of the most memorable moments from your past 40 years?
There's a couple really good ones. One is riding down the largest sand dune in the world in Namibia, Africa. First hiking the bike
Ooh.
all the way up to the top of the largest sand dune in the world, and then riding down it, which was an absolutely exhilarating experience. Hey, just being out in Africa, riding from Windhoek, Namibia to Cape Town, spent a month riding through kind of the gnarliest southern desert of Africa. But hiking that sand dune and being out there was a very eye-opening experience for me. As a bike messenger, I was working as a bike messenger at the time, and I just had this moment at the top where I was like, 2 weeks ago, I was delivering packages in San Francisco, and I'm standing on top of the largest sand dune in the world, and then maybe about to ride my gravel bike down essentially a 45-degree, you know, multi-thousand foot drop, and then continue to ride all the way to
Amazing.
Cape Town. Another one that really stands out is when we were crossing the Darien Gap in Panama. We had just crossed over. We had just hiked from Panama into Colombia. We'd spent about a week pushing our bikes on riverboats, going uphill on riverboats with our bikes, and then hiked the actual Darien Gap. And then
Hmm.
the village we were in, we got rolled up on by the FARC guerrillas. And it was a very real life moment. I mean, they had AK-47s, and we had to we had to get out of Dodge incredibly quickly. And it was honestly, it was an amazing experience. But it also, I was like, man, you got to pump the brakes. Like I said yes to everything in my life up until that point, and I had this moment where I was like, this is real. This is not some funny joke. This is like real life. These people have guns. This is like you're literally in the middle of nowhere in this village in Colombia. If something bad were to happen, like someone may find out a couple weeks from now, but there's no safety net here right now.
Wow.
So that was an amazing experience, but it definitely changed how I looked at things in life. And then that's kind of what got me into ultra endurance racing. And so I raced the Transcontinental with Nico twice. And the first year we didn't finish it, and so the second year we finished the Transcontinental. We were the first pair to finish the race, and that descending into Meteora, Greece, after racing 2,800 miles across Europe, self-supported, with Nico by
Whew.
my side, one of my best friends. We timed it right, man. We descended at sunset, and that to me, like I get goosebumps thinking about it. Like from going on these kind of crazy adventures from the track bike to these like very kind of crazy world adventures to then doing something like that. Not to say it was a full circle, but I definitely saw it as like I took this skill set and I really accomplished something with it on a personal level and was able to compete what I think of as one of the hardest ultra endurance races in the world with one of my best friends.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know Nico talks about that, and I know he's super proud of it as well. Chaz, let's transition a little bit to some community efforts. I know from knowing you a little bit and speaking with you, you've got a ton of things on your plate. You're juggling a lot of different activities, which I love. Um, but you also find time to make time for others. And one of the things that I know you're super proud of and work a lot with is this organization in the Bay Area called Cycles of Change. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, you got to give back to the community that supports you. And for someone that travels around the world all the time, it's like you got to have home, and you got to. There's a lot of crazy stuff happening in the world today, whether it's politics or everything from socioeconomics to whatever. It's tough, and I think the biggest thing anyone can do as an individual is affect local change. And I will plug like vote in your local elections, but participate locally because that's the one place you can change what's actually going to happen that you're going to be impactful in, and you're going to see the results of that change. And so Cycle to Change is a Bay Area based nonprofit that really works towards providing access to get people on bikes, primarily BIPOC or low income. But it's really just about allowing people to get on bikes. Getting on bikes can be tough. There's a kind of a big barrier to entry in terms of buying the gear. And so I've done a number of custom art pieces for them that they raffle off. It's great to work with them and kind of create, different t-shirt designs for them or, draw on a custom messenger bag and then they can raffle it off to raise money. But it's also where I donate all my old sponsorship gear. I have been
Hmm.
super lucky to be a sponsored athlete, but you get a ton of stuff and you don't need all that. And every year the brands come up with new stuff. So you have a lot of old stuff that you can't ride anymore because they're like, oh, that's last year's kit. Don't wear it. And then you just end up with boxes of stuff. And it's like there's so many people that need cycling gear. And so for me, it
Yeah.
really that's where everything goes. Like if you're around Oakland and you see everyone rocking old Oakley helmets and old kits from my old sponsors, it's because as long as you wear my size, like I got you. It's there. And I think that is providing people with the equipment is a big barrier to entry, or it helps alleviate a big barrier to entry to riding bikes because anyone can get on a bike. But if you really want to start riding in a serious way, like it helps to have a bib and it helps to have like a nice rain jacket and some shoes that, are comfortable and a helmet that works safety wise, getting people to wear helmets. I didn't wear a helmet forever. I don't like wearing helmets, but like I wear a helmet. I try to get everyone to wear a helmet. And so providing helmets to people is massive. So for me, just yeah, you gotta take care of the people that take care of you, and your community supports you. So you gotta support your community.
You specifically work with the Bay Area chapter. Is it a national organization? Do they have chapters in different cities, or is it just a Bay Area
It's
thing?
just a local
Local.
organization. I've done a lot of artwork with different artists. Chet Manilow, my dude from Portland, we just collabed on a wheel last year that we then supported Ride for Racial Justice, which is a little more of like a national sized organization. So we traded a tri-spoke much like that back and forth in the mail, did our different art on it, and then they were able to raffle it off to kind of raise money for the scholarships. So they directly raise money and then support athletes by providing scholarships to go to gravel events, which is huge because everyone loves the gravel scene, but it's expensive. You got to fly to the race, you got to get accommodations, you got to get the bike, you got to get everything. So company or organizations like Ride for Racial Justice really help support athletes by getting them to the races because I don't think people realize how hard it is to get to the start line of some of these races.
Let's talk about art a little bit more. In that example of that tri-spoke behind you is pretty cool. I've seen that you collab a lot with other artists, and you guys will actually mail pieces back and forth with one another. You'll put your own embellishments or enhancements on it and then send it back and forth. And this might take months. And then eventually you'll send that to an organization or give that to an organization to auction off, right? Tell us about some of that stuff.
I love working with other artists. For me, art is a super personal thing. It's like kind of how it's like a meditation. It's my safe space. Like I said in the beginning, this is my happy place in the basement. I travel for work. I'm all over the place. When I'm with people, I got to be on. I got to be Chaz. When I'm here in the basement, it's just me. And I love that about it. But at the same time, I feel like I'm always worried that I'm just going to like get sucked into this kind of very narrow view of what my art is and how I express
Yeah.
myself. And so working with other artists is a great way to kind of do this thing that I love, but then also really expand what it means to be an artist and just chat with them. Like I just got off the phone with this artist that paints frames, and we spent 45 minutes chatting about our process and about the weird things that we do as artists, and then 10 minutes talking about how we're going to actually do this collaboration and like the
Mhm.
nuts and bolts of it. So a lot of it is just sharing. Art's a very personal thing, but I think artists are really open to sharing with other artists and like being able to talk to someone on that
Yeah.
level and share a part of yourself that maybe you don't talk about. People see the end process of the art, but as an artist, your process is a very personal thing. So being able to share that with another artist and kind of talk about this personal thing that you both understand. How bike races, if you can only talk about the sprint at a criterium with other people that have sprinted for a criterium finish. No one's going to understand bumping elbows at 38
Right.
miles an hour unless you've done it. And so that's kind of why I enjoy working with other artists. And I do love the snail mail thing. I love in this digital age, don't get me wrong, I love everything about living in this amazing time we live in with iPhones and iPads and being so interconnected. But there's something amazing about a physical piece, an object that's a usable object
Yeah.
that gets traded between people and then eventually goes to somebody else who's going to use it. I love thinking about, man, I drew on that wheel or that pair of shoes or that helmet, and someone's going to go race on them, and they're going to go like fast, and they're going to feel this feeling of freedom that I get when I ride a bike. Everyone gets it when you go fast on a bike, and that's like ultimate like goosebumps feeling. And I love the fact that I'm somehow going to be a part of that because they're going to be wearing something that I drew on.
Chaz, I got to ask the question. So we're midway through your book or through the chapter, right? And you're in this zone and it's an amazing place that you're in. What does the last half of the book of Chaz look
You
like?
know,
Are you opening up a studio and making art and you've got a gallery space? What, what's next for Chaz?
I really, I've got maybe the next year and a half planned out. I'm not one to really plan that far ahead. Uh, I really don't know. I honestly think I would like to get out of the city. I've spent the first half of this book living in major urban areas and traveling to cities, and I would love to not be so closely attached to big cities. My partner has a child who I help raise, a stepson, and he's got 4 more years before he graduates from high school. So I think 4 years from now, the plan is to move someplace out of a city. My lovely partner is a flight attendant, and she's training to become a commercial pilot. So honestly, my big
Hmm.
push is to support her in becoming a commercial pilot, so that Captain Bone eventually can go do her thing, and I can just kind of follow along and travel the world, and kind of, I don't know, that's about as far as I got. I want to help her become a commercial pilot so that my partner's a commercial pilot, and that I think that'll open up enough doors that I'll keep myself busy.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty cool benefit, right? If I understand it right, if you're a pilot, your partner can hop as long as there's space on a plane,
Space available,
you
man.
can hop on, right?
Called non-revving, non-rev space available. If anything, and I'll fully admit this, that's my dirty little secret of how I became a sponsored bike racer. Not joking. A little joking aside, we've been together for 8 years, and so I was able to travel to all of these bike races as a non-rev, and so you don't pay anything. You
Right.
spend a lot of time waiting in airports because you're flying standby. So if the plane's full, you just wait to the next plane. But that's one thing that really allowed me to do what I do with my life is I was able to hit the road, and you just have to be really okay with spending 24 hours sleeping in an airport. Hot tip, if you ever need to
Right.
sleep in an airport, check out the prayer room. Excellent place to sleep. Almost every airport has a prayer room, a non-denominational prayer room, usually pretty quiet, padded floors. Great
Oh,
place to catch a quick nap.
interesting. That's a good tip.
Yeah.
All right. You didn't hear that here though, right?
No, no, not at all.
Chaz, we are almost out of time, but we do have one last section of this book, which is our speed round. You ready?
Yep.
All right. Pancakes or waffles?
Pancakes.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Lots of coffee?
Lots of coffee. I do love tea, but coffee. And let's be real, regular coffee over espresso. Not to hit on the Euros, but I love a good French press.
All right. Tacos or burritos?
Ooh, tacos, but real street tacos, soft shell tacos from Mexico, no hard shell tacos. Those are weird.
Spicy or mild?
Spicy, but not too spicy because I want to be able to taste the food.
If you had to live in cold weather or hot weather?
Cold weather because you can always put a jacket on, but when it's hot, you're just sweating.
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest, man, that's where I'm from.
So this next one's riding. So if you had to ride outdoors in the rain or the snow?
Ooh, the rain, just because I know how to ride in the rain, and every time I've tried to ride in the snow, I just end up with a number of very weird bruises all over my body. I don't see how people do it. It's so hard to ride in the
All right.
snow.
Mountains or the beach?
Mountains, 100%.
Cities or suburbs?
Cities right now. Right now.
Cars or trucks?
Ooh, a truck. Always. I drive a 92 Toyota. 30-year-old trucks for life.
Nice. How many miles do you have on that sucker?
357,000.
Wow. Pavement or dirt?
Oh, man. That is tough. Right now, dirt, if you had asked me this 2 years ago, it would have been pavement forever. Really hard to ride a track bike on the dirt. But right
Yeah.
now, put me in the dirt for sure. Knobby tires.
Gloves or gloveless?
Gloves, full finger gloves, no pads. Cannot handle pads. And part of crashing is saving your hands. Always wear gloves, kids.
Keep in your hand. Absolutely. Clipped in or flat pedals?
Clipped in. I'm going to tell you this. This is really gross. I used to only ride clipped in, and the first time I went to Europe for 2 weeks, I only brought a pair of CDs, nothing else. I wore mountain bike shoes for full 2 weeks. It's disgusting. Don't ever do it, but still clipped in.
Low pressure or high pressure in your tires?
Ooh, low pressure. Although I will say that that's only because of working with Zip. I was definitely 120 psi maxed out on my tires until I started working with Zip. Not to plug the party line, but total system efficiency, low pressure for life.
I asked somebody that same question recently, and they said the right pressure.
Ooh, good answer. Yeah.
Yeah, it was good. Kind of
But
threw
even
me
now, the
for a
right pressure,
curveball.
I would never go above 80 psi again in my life, I don't think. So low pressure.
Yeah, yeah. Fix it yourself or take it to a mechanic.
Ooh, with bikes, fix it myself. With my truck, unfortunately, take it to a mechanic.
And last question, dogs or cats?
Cats, hands down. I'm a cat daddy. I
Nice.
got tons of cats. Love cats. I love dogs too, but I'm a cat guy.
Chas Christiansen, you are awesome. Thanks so much for sharing your story, for spending time with us, and being who you are.
Yeah, thanks, DZ. It was a great time. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Brother, see you.
Take it easy, guys.